So welcome. My name is Anna Frizzle, and I am chair of the League of Women Voters Land Use and Transportation Committee, who has organized this meeting. And our members are Peggy Schultz, Jane Dilley, James Wilson, Marge Johnson, Sherry Evans Stanton, Tiffany Geyer-Leiden, Charlie Garlow, Letty Desswood, and Dick Johnson, many of whom are here with us today. We hope that this will be an ongoing conversation. So if you want to keep talking after today, please seek us out. And I'm just going to put in a quick plug for our book group that we're hosting on the importance of this topic, focusing on walkability. It's called Walkable Cities. That starts tomorrow. So that will continue to build on these topics. As for myself, I'm a retired family physician, and I'm incredibly interested in the intersection of health and environmental issues. All of us on the Land Use and Transportation Committee agree that the land use patterns and increasing vehicular travel that we are seeing lie at the intersection of some of the biggest issues of our time. We are facing climate issues from ever increasing vehicle miles traveled. We are facing community challenges and the loneliness that results from too little community. We're facing a loss of biodiversity from land use decisions and poor health that results from sedentary lifestyles. So today we're thrilled to have with us 3 local experts to address these various topics that all kind of unify under, we chose the lens to look at this through as vehicular miles traveled. But we're hoping to touch on all of these aspects of this topic. So we are lucky to have Pamela Steinbach, who's Director of Planning of the Department of Transportation in Delaware, Rich Hall, who's the Land Use General Manager for Newcastle County, and Bill Swiatek, who's Principal Planner for the Wilmington Area Planning Council. The agenda was to have a short introduction from each of our panelists, and then we had, as a committee, developed a list of questions that we are really interested in being sure we address. And then for the last 15 minutes of the meeting today, we're going to have some questions from our audience. So we invite you to keep your microphones muted on your Zoom, but then we'll take the questions in the chat. All right, so Pamela, will you begin with an introduction about yourself and the topic?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Anna. So yes, thanks for the great introduction. Yes, my name is Pam Steinbach. I am the Director of Planning for DelDOT. So I've been in transportation for over 20 years in various forms. So maintenance, design, construction, quality, performance management, asset management, and now planning. So we do, I have my bachelor's of science in civil engineering, and it's been a really long time since I've gone to the U of D, but go Blue Hens. And I just am very passionate about transportation, and specifically this topic has gotten a lot more coverage, a lot more focus on multimodal and climate change throughout the last, I'd say probably at least 10 years. So I'm very excited to just talk to you guys about what we're doing at DelDOT for some of our initiatives. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Rich, could you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be here and appreciate the League of Women Voters for putting this on. And it's a very important topic. So I'm the general manager of the Newcastle County Department of Land Use. So we have planning under that department. That's review of development plans that come in, as well as long-range planning. And one of the things we've really tried to do in the last 6 years is really tried to build up and emphasize that long-range planning. And I know you all, many of you all were involved in helping us with the comprehensive plan that was adopted this past summer, late summer. So and there's a number of transportation related recommendations, goals in there. I've been in this career for, gosh, at least 30 years. Most of it is in Maryland. So I've worked at both the state and local level in 3 different states. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. And Bill, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure, I'm Bill Switek, principal planner with the Wilmington Area Planning Council, and that's WILMAPCO. For those of you who don't know, we're the regional transportation planning agency. We cover Newcastle County in Delaware and also Cecil County in Maryland. And basically, we're charged with developing a regional transportation plan, which we're actually in the process of doing right now. So in the chat, I'm going to drop an event on February 8th. We're going to have a speaker that I'm going to be talking a little bit about today at that event named Todd Littman, who's written on VMT reduction and so forth. So I do hope you can jump out to that event as well. But basically, I've been interested in this topic because we've been tracking VMT for, I would say, about the last 10 years. I think Pam is right, really in Delaware, addressing climate change got more attention about 10 years ago, and it's found its way into our long-range plan and something that we've tracked. Myself, I've been at WILMAPCO since, I want to say 2005. I'm a geographer by training, but I've been a planner ever since school at UD as well. So great to be here. It's also great to see Anna, Peggy, and so forth, members of our public advisory committee. So thank you again for having me.
Thanks to all of you. So Pam, a first question for you. And I chose the traffic jam in the picture. It's actually from Miami, just because it's a classic. You know, it's the dilemma we all face. So no one enjoys sitting in traffic, and yet we keep doing it. So you know, the big overwhelming question here is, why is this happening? So to start out, Pam, would you define vehicular miles traveled for us? Tell us how it's measured and how it relates to walkability, bikeability, and transportation. That's a lot of public transportation. There's a lot of things there, but
no problem. Sure thing. And so specifically, the definition of VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, is the total number of annual miles of vehicular travel divided by what the population of what the state is, or an urbanized area. So specifically, the way that DelDOT tracks that is we use our DelDOT HPMS system. So that's our highway performance monitoring program, and that tracks so we count the number of centerline miles that in rural and urbanized, so state-owned, municipal-owned, and state-owned suburban roads. So that is a majority of the roads in Delaware. And in order to get the VMT, we utilize that length of the total number of roadway miles with the daily traffic. So we are required, as part of the feds, to count the number of vehicles that are traveling on our roads. So I do have some quick stats. So from the year 2011 to 2021, we have had an overall state increase of about 12% of the amount of miles traveled. It was about 10% for Newcastle, 13 for Kent, and then a whopping 17 for Sussex. So as you, I'm sure, know, if you've ever, if you go down to the beach regularly, that, that area is booming. I did take a look as well to kind of compare the number of VMT with the population increase. So with that 12% increase in the miles, our population growth in that same time frame, that 10-year time frame, is about 10%. So it's kind of growing at approximately the same rate, but it's just the dichotomy in the counties. So Newcastle, that population number is decreasing, but in Sussex it's increasing. So that's our general state trends. Now, just a reminder that we don't always want to correlate the number of vehicle miles traveled doesn't necessarily equal congestion or traffic. So it is based on those congested corridors. So obviously, like the interstate, like the big congestion corridors, and depending on the time and the day, the time of day. So it really is a balance between the safety of the safety of the drivers with the speed, because as I'm sure most of you realize that, the higher speeds we have, the more serious injury and fatalities that do arise. So just a reminder, the last year in 2022, we had 165 fatalities on our Delaware roadways, and that was tied in 19, so that we have not had a higher amount of deaths since 1988, when we tied at 165. So our Secretary Nicole Majeski makes sure to highlight this startling statistic in all of her presentations, and it really is something that we hold safety in the highest regards. So, congestion, we are on the pulse of that. We're on climate control, but most importantly, our mission is to make the roadways as safe as possible. I know there was a third question, Anna. What can you remind me? My apologies.
No, it's fine. It's super related to the question of safety, because I know in Delaware, a lot of our fatalities involve pedestrian and vehicle
Yes.
events. And so what you're saying about speed, resonates really a lot when you're talking about bicycling and walking. So
Yes.
that the second part of the question is how does VMT, how does that relate to bikeability, walkability, and public transportation here in Delaware?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, DelDOT's, also part of DelDOT's mission is basically mobility for all. So it's not just vehicles, it's bikes, it's pedestrians, it's transit. So we really do, for all of our projects, we take a holistic approach. So all of our capital transportation projects have an element of bicycle or pedestrian facilities. So we are constantly making sure that we are providing alternate routes, alternate ways for people to get to point A and point B. We do work a lot with municipalities and the counties and the MPOs to try to create as many of those connections for people. So we've, over the past 10 or 15 years, we are trying to not only just provide bike and ped facilities for recreational use, but we really want people to kind of move towards those alternate modes of travel for commuting, to run to Walgreens, to run to Whole Foods, to actually get to places so they don't have to always just hop in the car. So our capital transportation program has a wide range of projects that incorporate bike ped as alternative routes, as well as focused bike ped projects that where like almost all of the funding of the project is going towards those alternate modes of traveling. So I know that was really long, but just wanted to give you like a holistic view of making sure that like everybody is aware that DelDOT does take the entirety of not only Delawareans, but tourists and such who do visit our great state. So.
All right, well, so the next question is one that would probably be helpful to hear from all of you, but I'll put it to you first, Bill, and it's why are MAPCO and Newcastle County and the Department of Transportation interested in reducing VMT? I just did before I even asked you, looked at your organizations, and some of the statements definitely show a focus on VMT and an interest in reducing it. And so just curious for your different organizations focus on VMT, and relatedly, what is your angle or interest in walkability and bikeability? So Bill, let's start with you.
Sure, and I did some research today. I was looking at some of the old regional plans that we had on file, and when we had VMT, we discussed it really pre-2011. A lot of it was tied to trying to reduce peak hour VMT as a means to better address congestion. But beginning in 2011 is, again, when climate started to be something that was more of a factor, and we brought it into our long range plan at that time, not as an official action that we're going to reduce VMT, but as a way to better address climate change, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It was considered a new initiative that we would think about. 2015, we formalized that as one of our objectives or actions. And then 2018, we actually brought in the performance measure to look at VMT reduction. So we started to actively track it in our regional progress report, which measures how successful we are at implementing the long range plan. And then this year, what's proposed is that we adopt the state VMT target, which was part of the Delaware Climate Action Plan. And that's looking for a 10% reduction in VMT between the years 2020 and 2030. In terms of walking and biking, that's something that's really been at the heart of planning at WMAPCO, I would say, since the beginning, or at least for the last few decades. We've always tried to create a transportation system that people have the choice to take a car if they would like to, or to walk and to bike if they would. When we think about that, it's not something just to support physical activity, but it's a means of getting from point A to point B. And I do want to share a quick slide I have with that, if I can figure that out, because you guys did give me the ability to share my slides. And so I want to take advantage of that. So this is a cool analysis that we did as part of our transportation justice plan in 2019. So that this is up on our website and under that study. But basically, we were looking at how easy it is to get from the front door of somebody's house to different key destinations on different modes. And we looked at, a 15-minute car ride. We looked at a bike route on a low stress biking facility. We looked at a quick transit trip. I think it was about 20 minutes or so. without a transfer and on walking routes. And then also just to be able to walk, you know, from your front door to that destination on a low stress route. And we looked at various destinations, whether it's libraries, whether it's job centers, medical centers, pharmacies, things like that. And this graphic is just sort of a composite of all of them. We threw it all together and just to get some general ideas. And so what you can basically see is that our region is very well connected by car. You can have that easy car trip. So 95% of the time, you know, when we look at homes, they're able to get from point A to point B, but we don't see that with the other modes. And so we, you know, 23% connectivity for bicycles, 19 for transit, and then only 7% for walking. And so that's really the main reason why we also focus probably more heavily on some of the other modes, because we need to bring up those levels of connectivity. I'd also just quickly say that there's other benefits, certainly to VMT reduction. You know, James dropped into the chat just the correlation between VMT and safety. So I'd say that's definitely one. I mean, if you take VMT down, you have less exposure, more modal shift. So the numbers of crashes should go down as long as there's some investment, as well as, like Pam said, in speed reduction. And we've had some good success with different projects like Union Street, Memorial Drive, putting them on road diets. They've shown that they do slow the speeds down. I'm working in the Ardens, I'm working in Southbridge right now on the same projects. Residents are complaining about speeding traffic. So looking at ways to slow that down. And I'd also say social equity is a huge benefit of VMT reduction as well. I mean, cars are expensive, maintaining them is expensive, and too many people in our region are forced into car ownership because of that graphic I just showed, because it's often the only way to get from point A to point B. So, thank you.
Rich, could you talk a little bit about the land use perspective on VMT and these questions of community and health? Sure.
Glad to. So again, Rich Hall, General Manager of the Newcastle County Department of Land Use. We do work with WMAPCO and DelDOT and certainly many of you on these issues. I guess part of it is, I know this might seem almost too basic, but I'm sure many of us have seen communities here in Delaware or other parts of this country, or certainly in other countries that were built before there were cars, or before cars were so much of a dominating part of our transportation, right? So again, this might seem silly, but you know, think about how walkable the communities were before there were cars, right? How, you know, the mixed use there was before cars, and transportation safety before cars. I get that might seem a little silly to state it that way, but I think it is important to think back. You know, so much of what we do in planning seems like is trying to go back and learn how we got it right the first time. Now, of course, before cars were such a dominating force, you know, you didn't have those pressures as, you know, because people want what they want, right? Excuse me. So, you know, having, and we all know the story of the interstate program nationally and what that did to many of our cities, especially our older cities, and, you know, that whole story. And that story is scalable, you know, it applies to a lot of places, including Wilmington. Wilmington was much more vibrant before people could easily commute out of it. And so, you know, as we have a more dispersed land use landscape, as we do, and, you know, Newcastle County is mostly a suburban jurisdiction. So you're going to talk about how, you know, the good old days, or what we love to see if we're working from a clean slate. As much as I can be a pie in the sky planner, you know, we have the reality of what we have now, right? So how do we make it better? You heard Pam talk about some of the trends, which, you know, we're having the VMT, seem like, if I understood her correctly, the VMT is going up at slightly higher rate than in Newcastle County than population is, and that's even a bigger gap in Sussex County, I think I heard. So at any rate, the VMTs aren't going down, that's an issue to contend with. So when it comes to the land use and transportation, there's always this sort of chicken and egg debate. If you build the roads, people in development will come. But then, so that's if you build those roads, or, if there's too much, and also it depends on how accessible the roads are. That's why it's really important to think through where interchanges are off of higher volume roads, be it interstates or arterials and all that kind of thing. And also how the land uses can change on a road that you might actually want to walk along. How do we make our roads more interesting to walk along, make them safer, so people are more inclined to use non-motorized modes of transportation, walking, biking, transit, because that's the kind of street most people would prefer to walk down, right? We don't have as many cars zooming by, and then the land use, if that's an attractive street, it's more versus less likely that some of the kind of land uses you might want to see along there would be there, right? So again, that's the sort of the yin and yang, the chicken and egg. Where are we building roads? What kinds of roads are they? And how does that relate to land use? So this whole effort, idea, goal to better relate land use to transportation is always very important in the planning development world. That's no news to anyone here, I'm sure, which is why it's great you all having this workshop here today. But better mixed use is partly dependent on a transportation system that supports that. I think we can all recognize that if you have more of a mix of uses, it's been documented, it's been analyzed and modeled as well, you're going to have less trips typically, because again, if you think about how this plays out on the ground, if you're going to the grocery store, you can walk next door to the library and walk next door to pick up your child at daycare or doctor's office, then you're going to one spot from your house and you're able to take care of more chores in one trip. Or maybe you live right there, so you don't have to get in the car at all, right? So how does that relate to where and how we plan for growth? And what does that mean for density, for what the zoning looks like, and again, what the transportation network looks like? It gets pretty complicated pretty quick, not only logistically complicated, but infrastructure, and then not the least of which is public policy or politics. I mean politics with a small p. I'm not talking about Republican or Democrat. It's just how people articulate what they want and what they don't want. So sometimes people identify or link mixed use development to an area getting significantly more urban, and some people have a strong reaction to that, again, and especially in a fairly suburban jurisdiction like Newcastle County. So I've seen that in my 6 years here, in some instances, in trying to undertake some efforts to look at non-motorized modes of transportation, a little more mixed use, those kinds of things we're talking about. Some people have reacted to them in a very negative way, again, linking that to more congestion, more density, and maybe some neighbors that they're not used to. So it's, if you gather anything from my rambling here, it's complicated, but important.
Well, that leads right into the next question. So everyone that's putting thoughts or the questions in the chat, we will get to them probably at the end, but some of them are segueing right in with kind of this discussion was planned ahead before the open questions. And so the next question is for Pam, and it is about government policy. So Peggy wrote in, would DelDOT consider policy to support VMT reduction? So I guess that's, that's kind of the crux of the next question, is what what things could Delaware do? What things could the State Department of Transportation consider to
Sure.
increase walkability, bikeability?
Yeah, sure. So there are a few different aspects of that. So, being that there has been a huge push with EVs and, those vehicles, and now providing the need to provide a larger infrastructure for the onslaught of EVs that are coming on to the roadways. We have done some piloting of a VMT instead of a motor fuel tax. So that would be, you kind of just pay for the vehicle miles that you use. That we did do a pilot. We do have a lot of the good data. There hasn't been any movement on, what we are going to decide on that, because in essence, to move to that holistically, everybody has to put a sensor in their car. And, there are a lot of people who may not want to put some sort of tracking of vehicle miles in their actual vehicle. So we are probably thinking that it's, possibly going to be a hybrid of maybe vehicle miles, possibly, vehicle miles along with the motor fuel tax, so more of a hybrid than just a line in the sand, we're going to go to VMT. So that being said, with the EVs, we are working with OMB, DENREC, and us to figure out what the best infrastructure for all the charging is going to be. So our task has been to make sure that they go in first at the alternative fuel corridors. So the main ones like I-95, Route 1, Route 13, 113. So putting that, and that's about 265 miles of alternative fuel corridors. And that being said, we would assist with putting in the infrastructure for the EV charging, and then that maintenance and the responsibility of costs, of the charging of the electricity, we would turn that over to a third party or the owner of the charging stations. So it's a very exciting time right now, being that we have about 17.5 million of this, EV funding to really put in the best infrastructure, being cognizant of where to put it in, how we are going to roll it out. But we are just one of 50 states trying to kind of vie for being, close to the first, because as you can imagine, Delaware isn't the only state that's getting this funding. So we want to kind of be on the forefront to purchase this infrastructure early, so that it's the best bang for our buck. And overall, hit that, the main goal being the decarbonization and really promotion of health and how that relates to transportation.
Yeah, we're super supportive of cleaning up, kind of the vehicular transportation as it exists. But it's interesting because if we just, go full on replacing each fossil fuel car with an electric car, we're still faced with a lot of the challenges with safety. If we just keep driving more, there's actually, I think in Sweden, a weird phenomenon, whereas they've gone electric, people feel more okay about driving. So they've had a counterintuitive increase even in vehicular travel with electrification. So that's kind of, our committee started thinking really long-term about this. And we realized like simple electrification does a lot for the air quality, but lithium, as we all know, there's a lot of concern about the increase in mining, and long-term, ideally there'd be alternatives to driving cars, even if they are electric. And so I guess, I'm very curious about what other sorts of government policies could help encourage alternatives to vehicular travel.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think at least from DelDOT's perspective, our kind of main, kind of charge is to really try to build up the multimodal infrastructure. So as I said, not only do we do that with our big capital transportation projects, we actually, just kind of a note at the 95 and 896 in interchange that is that we just are reviewing bids on. We actually have a separated bike shared use path, bike ped path that's actually going to go across 95. It's like on the bridge, separated from the traffic. So you're going to be able to get, from points in Newark down to Lumps Pond, down to, that Glasgow Park area, to really kind of connect and to build that infrastructure. I mean, it's unfortunately, it's one of those things of just being part of the transportation. Some of it is piecemeal, but we are trying to do the best we possibly can to foster that mode of not just getting in your car, and hopping on. So then we also, both, just to FYI, we are working on the preliminary engineering for the last section of the Georgetown to Lewis Trail. So once that's actually built, we will have a 16-mile route between Georgetown to Lewis. So that is going to provide almost, almost all of it is off-road. There are some sections, where it does follow close to the road, but like low stress bikers can utilize that. So that also, like Bill was saying, plays into the equity and provide things. So if there are workers at the chicken farms and that kind of stuff, like they can actually just, they don't have to be saddled with purchasing a vehicle, that they could buy a bike and actually, have a big thoroughfare in order to get to where they need to. And then I would just point out one more thing is that with our developer partners, so, when a big development comes in and they are building homes, or they're building a warehouse, or they're building a commercial site, they are required to, depending on what investment level the development is in, they are required to either reserve or donate the permanent easements so that DelDOT, if when we actually do, we can build that multimodal infrastructure. But there are a lot of developer projects that we require them to build that infrastructure themselves before they get approval from us. So even though that is a kind of a piecemeal mode, because they don't have yet, they are only dealing with the frontage of their parcel, that is an extra thing that gets done to try to connect that alternative infrastructure and get more people off of the roads and onto those pathways. Good Lord, sorry, that was a lot. It's like, you can tell how passionate I am about it, right?
Is there a possibility of a Del Dot policy to reduce VMT?
Well, we do, I mean, that is a goal, not just for DelDOT, but for DENREC and a few of our other state and local partners. I mean, sure, like we would love to get more people, not just from a congestion standpoint, but a health standpoint as well. So it is going to be, we are still in the works, but it might be a hybrid of you know, the charging of a vehicle miles traveled with the motor fuel tax, but we just haven't, like, we're working toward it, but nothing has been finalized yet in that regard. Wish I could give you more concrete info, but we just don't have it at that time right now.
Well, Bill, back to you. What sorts of things can Will MAPCO do to help reduce vehicular travel and increase other modes of transport in the area?
Thanks. And I agree with you, Anna, about your committee's charge. I just want to say that the UN Environmental Program came out with a report last year that said it was a false dichotomy just to focus on EVs and not to do anything about promoting compact use cities and bike ped. And so I think you guys are on the right track, and I can send you that report. There's a lot of ways to reduce VMT. I did look up some numbers for you, and I think Rich is right on the ball that the biggest one really is with smart growth, and it's having more infill and density, complete communities. You know, those types of activities can increase transit by 20% or more and lead to VMT reductions, again, of 20% or more. Other practices looking at efficient parking pricing. So really looking at how expensive it is or inexpensive it is oftentimes to just drive somewhere and park for free, which happens a lot, can lead to a 10% or more reduction in vehicle trips. Same with road pricing. So that would be something that would probably be controversial as well, but maybe pricing on the road during periods of congestion that can lead to a 10% or more reduction in volume, as well as those investments in bike ped and bus over the country. We've seen that auto travel has declined by 5% or more with those types of investments. But when you couple that with complete communities, so when you do those bike ped investments and you also have the land use going in there, it can lead to a 20% or more reduction in driving. I think some of the other things, as Pam has mentioned, state's done a great job with some of the bike ped activities. Just in Newcastle County alone, like looking at our East Coast Greenway, which is a trail that's running from Maine to Florida. We've been tracking how that project has increased and has been, you know, more and more connected. Those pieces of the puzzle are coming together. So back in 2017, it was 78% complete. Today, it's over 86% complete. So we are filling things in. But I think one of the key things, you know, again, coupled with those improvements, and I'm going to share my screen again, is looking at ways to improve connectivity within our communities themselves, and then linking into those networks that we're building. This is a map of a school in the Route 9 corridor that I've worked with on a Safe Routes to School program, McCullough. And this is data from a few years ago, but what it's showing is where kids live that go to the school. It's a middle school. And basically the green dots are kids that walk to school, and the gray dots are kids that don't walk to school. And the reason, when you look at the map, why those kids aren't walking to school is because there's you know, these big walls in between where the school is and where their houses are, and those are roads. US 13 there on the left, Route 9 on the right, I-90 or I-295 right down the middle. And you can see just in this small example of, if we had some safer crossings out there, if we were able to slow the speeds down a little bit, how many kids could actually, start their day with a nice walk and end it with a nice walk versus having to get on a bus and all the expense that goes into that. We developed a plan for the Route 9 area, the master plan, but then we also have worked on a past plan for this corridor as well. And what this map is showing is something we call low stress biking islands. And so that's a interesting bit of jargon for you guys to learn. But basically, these are neighborhoods that are isolated because the level of stress to bike from one to the other is too high. So it's really not comfortable for a bicyclist or even a walker to get from one to the other because of one of those walls. And so what we're doing here is suggesting a trail network or a pathway network that would link up these neighborhoods. These are neighborhoods, again, as Rich mentioned, with sprawl and with land development that were built each one by itself, and they weren't really built to connect to each other. They were built, this developer put it here, this one over here, but nobody would really thought about how do we link together. And so what you end up having is a lot of cases where people have to go out to the main road to get from point A to point B. In the same example of those students and so forth. But what we could do is, again, build off the trail networks that are there, better link these up. And so we went through a whole process where we're looking at ways to do this. And one of these numbers, what they're showing are the number of people that would actually benefit from it. So this example over here on the left is 9,000 people. So if you made this connection here on Bolden Boulevard, you would get all the folks that live in this neighborhood connected with one of those big state investments, which is the Jack Markell Trail. Get them a link into that so they can use that trail to get into Wilmington, to get down to Newcastle in a much safer way. So again, I think looking at the land use issues is probably number one and one of the biggest things, but then also we can do a lot with connectivity of the system that's out there and that's emerging.
All right, well, that is the kind of up with time for the preset questions. So I wanted to get to things that the group's been writing in about. So Peggy, I think we asked your question. Bob had asked Bill the question of it was traffic in northern Newcastle County. So extend your view of working on the Ardens toward the west side on Grub by St. David's Church, getting too speedy there as well. I think my question is like, just to add on to Bob's, what sorts of things do you do to slow down traffic on these arterial routes?
Yeah, and just note, very recently there was one of those, you know where they run the rubber hoses across the street and they count the cars. Well, something was there about 2 weeks ago, so I know something's going on. But I live literally in the shadow of St. David's Church, in the neighborhood at the top of the hill, and it's just getting a little nutty lately.
Yeah, so I apologize, I'm not familiar with the area, but that particular segment. But I would say one of the things that we do is develop plans. So when communities have an issue, we can come in similar to what we're doing with the Ardens, and we're working with those communities there to come up with ways to slow traffic down. We're going to be looking at intersections, and there's many roundabouts that you can put in. There's safer ways to get people across the roads. A lot of times issues are related to the width of the road being too big. And so there might be cases where you can take lanes out. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but you can actually take lanes out sometimes to lower the speeds and make it safer for people to walk and bike and wheel around. And again, intersection rebuilds, lowering the speeds, chicanes are another great option. So there's a big toolbox of things you can do. It's really about working with the community, finding what their priorities are, and going from there.
So just
Noted, thank you.
Just adding on to that question for you, Rich, if you look at an established area like the Brandy 100 neighborhood, a lot of our committee members live in that whole northern Delaware suburban area. What sorts of land use changes will help to make the area more amenable to public transportation and make it a more walkable destination type place, community to live in.
Sure. I mean, we've talked about a lot of the potential things. You know, one project we're talking about is seeking a grant that would, I guess, indirectly get to some of this area, but a RAISE grant for call it the Newport Trail that would connect some of the gaps in existing and planned, other planned bike and pedestrian trails. You saw at a smaller scale how Bill was showing just at the neighborhood scale how important connections are. I'm not going to talk a ton about this grant proposal, just to say that you know, there's plans for a Wilmington loop, and what we're trying to seek funding for is a connection to connect to that, the Markel Trail, and going along Newport and down to Newark. So that would connect a lot of dots, right? So that's one thing, is continue to build on these connections. The other is looking at some of the policies we have. I remember the league supported some legislation we worked on to try to update, reform our level of service requirements that have been in the county Unified Development Code for, I can't remember right now how long. They've been in there for a long time. And what that does is it looks at basically what it seeks to do is to really not let development take road capacity below level service D. What that can do, though, is in some cases, even if that below level service D for trips on our roads, even that goes below that for a short period of time, it can still drive funding for improvements or stopping development. What that can do is spread development out and sometimes make improvements to roads that really aren't that full. That's a matter of opinion, I suppose. I mean, we have these level services standards, which are objective, you know, they're actually measured, but what that number should actually be, not how you get there, what that number should actually be, you know, our view is we should look at that with a little more flexibility. You know, do we need to have roads having a high level of capacity all the time? Because when you really get to it, you're not going to have much in the way of public transit until you get to a certain level of density, because it just becomes cost prohibitive and inefficient to service communities, neighborhoods, areas that don't have a critical mass of ridership, right? And you're not going to get that if your growth is all spread out. So that's a big difficulty there. I think we need to continue, and the comp plan calls for trying to enhance transit. That's easier said than done, of course. But that's something that's key. And again, it's a little bit of, you know, people can make the argument, you know, build it and they'll come. Certainly transit is very expensive. So, you know, high level of scrutiny for where transit dollars are spent. But, you know, we have the new station that's being built there in North Claymont, with quick access to Philadelphia, and, you know, really excited to see what that'll bear over time, over there, First State Crossing area, the old steel mill up there in North Claymont. So that's one thing. There's a number of things called for in the comp plan, more mixed use. We've all talked about that. Also trying to concentrate growth. So, you know, we really in this comp plan have made noted links and goals, numeric goals to the state's state strategy areas, you know, state strategy areas 1 through 4, and trying to target growth in areas 1 and 2. That's the areas that are already built, because you keep spreading out your growth, which sometimes, believe me, I get the temptation, the push to do that. We keep spreading it out. You're rarely going to get mixed use. You're rarely going to get transit, and you're rarely going to get walkability. So, you know, I think for a whole bunch of reasons, you know, for climate change reasons, for livability, for safety, for healthy communities, trying to better concentrate our growth, build, you know, and with a real focus towards quality and better connectedness, really help a lot of this.
Oh yeah, just a lot of questions coming in. Pam, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to merge some questions here about public transportation. So Linda pointed out that not everyone is able to walk and bike. And so what about car sharing? What about increasing public transit? There's a question about electric buses. How soon will it be till we get electric public buses? So yeah, so I guess those are the questions. So how do we encourage more public transportation in Delaware? How are they going to go, those buses go electric? And what about car sharing? I was just remembering my father, going with a carpool of 4 people to work in the 70s, and that, that's not even car sharing. That's like an older way of getting to work that seems to have gone by the wayside largely.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I know when I lived in Newcastle Drive and to Dover, I had a carpool and a van pool. So yes, it's for sure something that is a good thing. So in terms of, so we are transitioning from like we actually do have electric buses, DART DTC buses that are in service. We did get a few grants. I do not know the specifics. If you guys want to know the actual details on like the number of electric buses and stuff, I can get that for you from DART. But we are transitioning. We do have some in service. So, and we have been very successful at obtaining grants to replace those with electric buses. So that being said, we are doing DTC and DART are doing a big push on the DART Reimagined. So we are really trying to, being that there has been obviously DART and transit service went down dramatically during the pandemic, and it's bounced back, but it has not bounced back to what the pre is or more. So we are doing a whole big public initiative campaign, kind of like grassroots effort to figure out like what if there are new and innovative initiatives that we need to be undertaking for our transit system. So there are the operational part of DART is constantly checking and analyzing like the ridership and which routes are more utilized than others, and trying to really zero in on providing that regular service to the most populous areas that actually use it, and then possibly taking a more in-depth look at some of those other service lines that don't get utilized, and maybe like moving them to the more populous areas. But combined with that is DART Connect. So it's that I don't know if you guys have heard of it before, but it's what it really is micro transit. So I know that's kind of like a buzzword, but it really is kind of like an Uber or Lyft for buses. So it is, you go on an app. I mean, right now it's only in the Georgetown Hillsborough area, just because if it was larger, it'd take a half a day in order to get to like the grocery store. So it is like in that centralized area right now, but it has been a humongous success. And so we are talking with the city of Newark to do some sort of micro transit in that area as well. But as part of that DART Reimagined big public initiative, they are going to get to the some more recommendations on really tweaking and providing the best transit service we can for specifically Delaware. I mean, Delaware transit is not going to be like Sacramento or San Francisco transit. It's just, we just don't have the same profile. We're very sprawled out. So that is one of our big initiatives with transit. What else was there?
A couple of questions about affordability and whether there's a possibility of making buses free, at least in Newcastle County.
Oh, that I don't know anything about. That I know that there are, some like discount programs, like if you do pay like for a number of pass thing, that it is discounted. I'm not exactly sure if there is a push to do it free. The DART is heavily subsidized already by DelDOT, just being that just the cost of doing transit will always be not a money maker. It's not supposed to be. But I think that would be something that if once the DART Reimagined gets off and running and stuff, I think that's going to be starting in the spring of this year. They're going to have a ton of public workshops and grassroots efforts and I would absolutely put that in as for comments. So
well, it's just after 1 o'clock. I know I talked to Rich and Pam and Bill about a 12 to 1 commitment. Are any of the three of you able to stay a bit longer to finish out questions, or should we say?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I am good for about 15 more minutes. I have a 1:30, but I can do about 15 more minutes if everybody else can.
Yeah, it's good with me.
It's good.
It's been super informative and we're really appreciative of the time. So it looks like there's a good number of questions around. Actually, I'd like to call on James Wilson to ask his question about vehicle miles traveled. Bill, can you unmute yourself? I mean, sorry.
Thanks, Anna.
Yeah.
Hey, Pam, could I just real briefly follow up on Peggy Schultz's question? I think it was the very first question about VMT reduction policy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there are any current discussions within the department about, that VMT reduction kind of from a policy point of view. From your perspective as a, long time department insider, is that the sort of thing that you think the department could take leadership on, or does that feel more like something that the legislature might take leadership on and tell the department that it should be thinking in those terms?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would probably be a good partnership. I'm not sure if I know we did we did work on that pilot program. I know we got a lot of good information. I think that it is.
Pam, so I'm not talking about a VMT tax.
Okay.
So this has nothing to do with the idea that we're switching over from the gas tax to
Okay.
VMT tax.
Gotcha.
Instead, it would be and there are a couple of states out there that have this. So Caltrans has something like this. Minnesota DOT has something like this, where there is a policy in place for the department to, for example, think about its capital program in terms of VMT reduction. So if you took a VMT reduction policy and connected it to the department's CTP, you would get, prioritization points in the CTP for projects that were identified as meeting, helping the department meet this goal of VMT reduction. So I don't, and tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think there are any current discussions inside the department about VMT reduction.
Not that I'm aware of.
So is that I mean, is there any way, do you see the department becoming interested in that on its own? Or do you think this is something that sounds more like, like something that would come out of the legislature and so be, the department would be asked to start thinking in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we already have, I mean, we do have, as part of the CTP prioritization, we do have weighted values for, if a project does have like multimodal aspects, but there is not anything specifically on VMT. So I don't, I mean, I think that it would probably need further, I mean, I think it probably needs a champion. I just am not exactly sure if DelDOT would take the lead on it, just because I mean, it's a great thing. It is just, there are so many different, cogs in the DelDOT machine. Like it's a lot of it is interrelated. I don't foresee us taking up the, the charging forward in a policy, at least not right now, but it's not to say that it's, it has a lot of merit for sure.
Well, so last thing on this, Bill, I think I heard you say that WMAPCO was talking about some sort of goal in this area, 10% reduction in VMT. Did I hear you right?
That's right. Yeah, that's proposed as part of the regional transportation plan. You can take a look at it online.
So Pam, my question is, if that were to show up in the, Newcastle County, WMAPCO, Newcastle County official plan, is there some way that would start to, emigrate its way into the way the department does business if that were to show up as an official part of the regional transportation plan?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like, I mean, MPOs have we work closely with MPOs to figure out which projects are going to be included in the RTP and eventually which one to get nominated to go into the CTP. So that emphasis for MPOs would 100% correlate directly to projects that go into our capital transportation program.
Thanks, Pam.
Of course.
All right, well, I just want to wrap up with maybe a question for all three of you. I'll start with you, Rich. So I think I'm just going to summarize what I think is the vision, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I see it as you were kind of laying out a picture of more dense, multi-use communities that would be appealing for pedestrians and walkers and actually make public transportation possible. So I'm curious about what you see as barriers and what we can do to help.
Well, some of the barriers are public acceptance and public pressure to build this kind of communities. A lot of times if we get a more compact development proposed, or if there's policies discussed to build that, there can be pushback on that. So we need the sort of policies in place. And then when the projects come in, they need to be supported as well. And certainly we need the development community that actually wants to build them, right? There's some of the things I talked about, continuing to work on how we relate development projects with their demand for transportation and how that's regulated. And we try to make some reforms there. Is where we provide infrastructure and where we don't. Again, with a focus towards trying to concentrate growth. There's some of the things all of us have talked about, bike trails, and I totally appreciate and understand not everyone can use them. And there was a question, I believe, from James in the chat about a raised grant. And what I was referring to was one that the county is applying for, not one. I think you were referring to an existing raised grant, but that's, again, to build up, to continue the connections and to build out the network of trails in the county and by extension, further implementing the county's bike master plan. And I could go on for a while here. We have a Vision Zero goal in the comp plan. And we also, I guess the other thing I would mention is a comprehensive plan. One of the highlights of the plan is to identify key corridors where we really want to concentrate on economic development, mixed use development, and certainly a subset of those to a degree, really focusing more on trying to get more complete streets. So we get some of this kind of objectives we've been talking about, more walkability, bikeability, more mixed use. I guess you could think of it as a sort of extension of the Main Street type concept.
Is there anything the public or interest groups can do to support this vision? In continuing to engage, for example, the League of Women Voters was pretty involved in the comprehensive plan, and we always appreciate that. I think it really helped for some of the more progressive policies. So now, next step is implementation. So this meeting here is a good sort of conversation, but be looking for or ask for or demand that we implement this aspect of the plan. So whether it's supporting grants for completing or enhancing the bike network, moving forward on some of these corridor efforts that I mentioned. I know I only mentioned generally, continue whether it's at the project development scale or at the broader zoning scale, specific steps that will make things that they'll make our communities more bikeable and walkable. That doesn't all happen at once. The comprehensive plan is the one big, the word comprehensive document, and it's got a lot more of these kinds of goals and policies than the previous plans. And so now what we're doing is carving out key parts and trying to implement them. So stay with us on that, stay honest to move forward on a number of things in the plan that relate to much of what we were talking about here today. Bill and Pam, do you have anything to add about what the public can do to support efforts to provide alternatives to vehicular travel?
I would just echo everything Rich has said and say that, yeah, I think one of the big things is we don't really hear a lot of pressure. I mean, in my career, this is the first time being invited to a panel on VMT reduction. When we look at public surveying, 3 out of 4 people are happy with the way the system works. They say, hey, I get around just fine. But I think looking at some of these more nuanced views and saying, well, maybe it could be better, is something really that that I think your group can support. I think getting involved with our regional transportation plan, again, I'll drop that into the chat again, but just providing input on the projects that are in there and saying, hey, is this really something that we'd like to see? What are our thoughts about it? You will find that there's more bike ped spending in there than we normally have. I think looking at transit, it's about 16% of the spending when it's normally about 10% when we look at the capital plan. Bike ped is at 8% of the project spending, so bike ped only, and that's normally like 2%. So those are things that we're doing, to improve this. But we also have 63% of spending going to capital or capacity increasing projects. So these are projects that do have a multimodal element, or they might, but they're also making the system bigger. So just taking a look at some of those things, again, getting involved with projects both in your communities and especially some of the regional level projects as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think both Bill and Rich said it. I actually do have to say, I know that we, report on VMT and everything, but this is definitely the first forum that it has been kind of brought to light in a regard of reduction on a public scale, shall I say. So I do think that, we get a lot of input and questions on safety and on congestion and, more bike ped and everything. I think just kind of like being active in the community, coming to forums like, being involved with the public sector of commenting on projects, on plans, on studies, like that goes such a long way in actually hearing from the publics. So we very much appreciate your candor and your information and like hands-on, like out in the field public perspective. So you guys have been great. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much to Rich and Bill and Pam for taking your lunch hour today and for all the wonderful information. And we're really excited to hear. I'm personally excited about the ideas you brought forward. And thanks to everyone that joined us today. I'm gonna collect the links that were posted in the chat and send out some notes from the meeting. And again, anybody who's interested in talking more, we have a book group tomorrow. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.